Hello, friends. Welcome back to the show. I'm really excited today. We have one of my favorite humans in the entire world. Jackie Koch is here, and she is going to just provide us with so much juicy knowledge. I know because I've actually watched her speak and I've sat over a glass of wine or two, and we've talked about the magic that she has to offer you today. So before we get into it, let me just tell you who Jackie is if you're not sure. So Jackie has over 15 years experience prospecting talent and building teams for Fortune 500 companies, startups, and online businesses. She has an MBA from Concordia University, but argues that she's actually learned more about scaling a modern business over the last 5 years in LA tech startups. Being an entrepreneur at heart, she launched People Principles, which I'm obsessed with, where she helps founders scale and lead their teams with consulting and boutique recruiting services. She is quite literally the one-stop shop that I knock on her door anytime I have questions about anything around like HR, hiring, people principles. So, Jackie, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's
Yeah.
so fun to finally be here and doing this podcast thing with you. I'm a little nervous that our conversations are recorded. Just kidding. But
Well, okay. So we normally start with rapid fire, but I think I'm actually going to share a funny story because I think the audience would love this story. And if they don't, it's fine. I love this story.
Great.
It's the story of the time you and I decided to go to the Crystal Show in Tucson. So Jackie lives in Scottsdale as well. And we drove down to Tucson, which is about like almost 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
We decided to go to the Crystal Show. Is that what it's called? Like the rock?
No.
What's it called?
A funnier name than that. It's the Gem
Oh,
Show.
the Gem Show. That's right. Yep. How could I forget? We decided to go to the Gem Show. We go there, we walk around. It's like meh. And then on the way home, I'm watching someone else's Instagram stories who also is at the Gem Show. And I realized that we were definitely not at the right Gem Show. And that was exactly why we really didn't buy anything or see anything good.
Hey, we got some jewelry, but not the big things that we were looking for, but it was still a fun time.
I know, but now we know where to go next year. And like that, there you go, put a bow on it. That's exactly what it looks like when you're hiring and firing. It's all about jumping in, trying it and learning as you go, right?
100%. Yes. Trial and error. I wish I could say there's the perfect recipe, right? But a lot of times it's like, you just got to jump in and try, and you learn so much along the way.
Yeah. Okay. So I have a laundry list of questions that I want to ask you, partially, just personally, but then also I know that this is going to help so much with the listeners. So my first question, because I've been talking about this a lot, I actually just recorded a reel on it right before we hit play. What is your definition of scaling? Because I do feel that there's a misconception in the coaching industry specifically right now around the term scaling, where I'm finding people are sort of throwing it around. Scaling your business, what they really mean is just more clients and more hours on Zoom calls. And to me, that's not scaling. So as someone who literally helps people scale companies, what is scaling?
Yeah. I mean, scaling is 100% about increasing revenue in whatever that means. And a lot of times you can only do that in a couple ways. One is like scaling the amount of locations in which you serve people if you have like a brick and mortar. The other is or expanding your hours, working more, right? The other is expanding your service offerings, right? Which also results in working more usually.
Yep.
And then the third is scaling through people. So hiring a team to help you get the work done. And that can be hiring people to replicate the work you do. That can be hiring people to take the things you're not great at off of your plate. But you can't really scale without increasing the people supporting your business.
Yeah. So what do you say to the person who wants to do it all and wants to wear all the hats? Because I know I definitely was there at a point where it's like, but I'm the only one who could do it this way.
Right. That might be true. You're the only one who can do it that way, but there might be a better outcome, a better way that you don't even know because you're not open to receiving it or seeing how it works, right? So it's like, yeah, that might be true if that's what you want to do forever. And I think you just have to take a hard look at like, if things don't change, what's this going to look like in 5 years from now? And if the answer is I would be happy if it's exactly the same way, then great. But if not, then there's a lot of benefit to adding people to your team because it adds new ideas, diverse ways of thinking. There are new offerings. Like there's so many benefits to adding people to the team.
Yeah, but it's so scary, right? I mean,
Mhm.
so many people, and I know I felt this for such a long time. It's one of the most common questions I get too. It's like, if you could go back, what would you do differently? And I really wouldn't do anything differently because I don't think I'd be here then. I truly believe in that butterfly effect. But at the same time, like the one thing that always comes up, I'm like, oh, I probably would have delegated a little bit sooner,
Mhm.
even though all of my coaches and mentors were telling me to, and I wasn't listening because
Mhm.
I wasn't ready or I didn't think I
Right.
was ready, whether that was financially or just egoically, right? So this is
Right.
one of those situations in business as an entrepreneur where we always talk about your business is a reflection of you and it will only grow to the extent that you grow. This is like the deep ego work of, yeah, I'm actually going to give up some control, which means or could mean things maybe aren't going to get done exactly the way I want them to, or I'm used to them getting done this way. So
Mhm.
when you're coming into a company and you're helping people hire and fire, really, do you ever have to help people, business owners, entrepreneurs navigate sort of the emotional side of letting go of control?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm with my I'll call her my sister-in-law, Lori, and we are
Yeah.
actually talking about this today about how so much of the fear for her was not so much control. Well, I guess we didn't have this conversation, but knowing her, I know I don't think it's a control thing for her,
Mm,
but I think it was more of a what if it doesn't work out? I'm stuck with this person forever. Like I don't want to have to fire this person if it doesn't work out. There's like a fear of what if it doesn't work out, right?
yeah,
And it's just it's not like I hate talking about firing people because you don't hire people with the intention of a bad outcome,
sure.
right? But the reality is it's not that scary or that hard to fire somebody or and maybe it's the word, right?
Mm,
If you decide that it's not the right fit for the role or your business, like you can end the relationship just like you would end any relationship, right?
yeah,
Like I just think the word fire maybe seems so harsh,
yeah,
but it's not you're not going to get sued if you fire someone unless you do it for a reason that is protected by law.
sure.
And I guess there's cases where people will go crazy and try to fight like sue you, but that's very, very rare. I think
Yeah.
in fact, in 15 years, I've never had to work on a wrongful termination claim
Wow.
ever in 15 years of
Do
doing
you
this.
find that most of the time it's just sort of the person is sitting in the wrong seat or they're not aligned with the mission? I mean, is it
It,
really anything bigger than that?
I think it can be the wrong seat. I think it can be the person hiring wasn't clear on what they needed to begin with,
Mm,
and so they hired the wrong person.
mm,
I think that happens a lot because you don't really when you're so busy, you don't take the time to get clear on, like, what is it that I need help with? And I think the more important question is, who are the types of people I want to work with? I think a lot of times it's a personality
yeah,
and, characteristic mismatch
yeah.
versus a skill mismatch, and people don't think about the woo-woo-y parts of the relationship, right, when they're hiring.
Well, I love this conversation because I definitely have made, I'm not going to call it a mistake. It's growth, right? So I've made this growth challenge for myself in the past where I hired out of reaction instead of being proactive, which I think is super common, right?
Everyone does.
Yeah, you get to a place where you're like, I can't do this anymore. I have nothing left. Like I'm desperate. And so we sort of hire out of desperation. And I find in those moments we either might hire the wrong person or we might put the wrong person in the wrong seat. And we can talk about what seats mean. So if the listeners right now are a little unsure, we can clear that up. But I have found when I've hired in that sort of frantic scarcity reaction, to my business or to my energy or to my lack thereof, I should say, then that's when I'll run into kind of these challenges. But it's really interesting too to hear you say like this energetic kind of characteristics match, because is it true or is this just a myth that we really shouldn't be hiring people that are just like you? And if that is true, then what does that mean? Can you define that for us?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you definitely most people fall into the trap of hiring people who are like them,
Yeah.
right? It's just it's not it's human nature. Like you can't I shouldn't say you can't help it because there's things you can do to not do that, but if you don't pay attention to that, that can definitely happen. And so I think there's a difference between I think like personality fit and almost like company core values. Like,
Mm,
what do we stand for as an organization? You know, um, and getting clear on what like those 3 to 5 things are as an organization, and then hiring for those. For example, everyone uses work ethic, and I think what the it's a great thing to hire for, but you have to define what that means, right? Like, what
sure.
does that mean for you, right? And you make a definition of that, and then you look for that in the hiring process. But you may find somebody who has strong work ethic but is an introvert,
Mm.
or an extrovert, and I love extroverts, right? And or I love people who talk through things ad nauseum.
Yeah.
People who need me to be super detail oriented, like I'm not great at. So, you just want to get clear on like what those things are that your company stands for, and then look for those, because you are correct. Like, if you're not clear on that, then you're just going to naturally gravitate to people who are like you, because
Yeah.
that's how we are as humans.
Oh, I think we even do that in relationships sometimes. I mean, before Mike,
100%.
there was time that I dated men before Mike, right? And I had a history of dating guys that were just very similar to me, not just in we like to do the same things, because so do Mike and I, but there was just never any like pushback. There was never really any interesting conversation, because it was just like, well, yeah, we agreed on everything. And so I actually remember when Mike and I first started dating, we disagreed about something, and I was like, oh, this is crazy. Like, I don't have to deal with this, right? Like, oh my goodness, I don't need to be with a guy where we disagree. And my mom was like, you don't agree on something, and so you're gonna like walk away, you're gonna throw in the towel? She's like, no, it's a beautiful opportunity for you to learn and see something from a different perspective. And now here we are over a decade later, and it's like my favorite thing about him, because we do disagree on certain things. And so I think it's the same thing
Mhm.
in business, where it's not just hire someone that's like you. Okay, cool. You can have comfortable, fun conversations. And when you have a great launch, you want to go do the same thing to celebrate, right? We took our team to Vegas, and it was awesome
Yeah.
that they wanted to do that. But it's more so too, I think, in skill set. It's like, I don't need to hire my replica. I don't need to hire someone that could do all the
Mhm.
things I can do. I actually want the person to be able to plug some of the holes of the things that I'm not great at,
Yeah, 100%.
which is where I think the conversation comes in a lot for specifically founders and coaches and creators, where we have the visionary and then we have sort of the integrator,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. And there's some skills that like you can most of the skills you're hiring for, you can teach. Like,
Mm,
or they can like learn it, but there's some things that may be important to your company that you can't teach, right? Like, if you want to have a team of people who are like, I think curiosity is such a really great strength or core. I'm going to call it strength because I can't think of another word right now.
yeah.
Competency, but that's too corporate. Like, that's such a great skill to have,
Yeah.
because people who are curious are going to like most of the time figure stuff out and want to learn, and there's just a lot of benefits that go to hiring somebody who's curious. Um, but you can't really teach that, and
Yeah.
that's actually one thing I learned from my last full-time job. The co-founders of my company, they had 5 they established 5 core values of the company, and they were things that they were proclaiming to the world that, like, if you come work here, you have to have a mastery of these things because we are unwilling to teach you this,
Yeah.
right? And so it's like, what are those things for you?
Yeah, I love that line in the sand. Something that we did every time we do when we hire someone is we have them through the whole process, which I'm sure you could talk about. We have them do a project.
Mhm.
And I feel for us, the project is a really good indicator of some of those things that you're talking about. It's like, how resourceful did this person get? Did they go above and beyond? And I know for us, that's been huge. So is there something similar, or is it something like a project when you're in the hiring process? How can you find out? Because it's not just like a question on a submission or like a resume,
Of
like, are you
course.
resourceful? Of course they're going to say yes, right? So
Of
how do you
course.
really figure that out?
Yeah. So I think, yes, you can definitely, depending on what those things are for your business, you can find out things in the process that help determine it. So, like, one of the things for my last company was communication, but they defined it as like, can you convey your ideas in concise ways? Like, do you write well? It wasn't like there was some verbal communication to it, but that actually wasn't the definition that they wrote. So in that, I was looking at how they responded to emails, like what was their written communication like in exchanges when we were lining up time for them to meet with people, things like that. And then of course, throughout, we would do projects depending on the role. But then another great way is to develop behavioral based interview questions for each of those things. So instead of saying like, would you consider yourself to be resourceful? You'll be like, tell me about something you had tell me about a project that you had to complete that you had no idea what it even meant or how to do it. And then they answer and you're like, okay, well, what did you do first? Like, what was the first thing you did? And then you go back and forth on that. Right. So you ask questions in that way, or for curiosity, would you consider yourself to be a curious person is like not a great question, but like a question along the lines of, tell me something that you recently learned that you found super interesting, and you can kind of get a feel for it. It's not a perfect recipe, but weaving those into the process is definitely a great way as well.
Yeah, I love that. So something that I learned from you and then indirectly from, we'll call it your family, which are, longtime mentors and friends of mine, was when we were putting out different job descriptions, right? We sort of had the description, and then from the description, which we can talk about because I loved being able to put personality into our description and not keep it super corporate. So before I even move forward, what's like a good way to write a description? What needs to be in a description, and where the heck does a job description even go?
Right. Well, I think a job description is pointless, is useless. It's not helpful. Where it goes, honestly, is into somebody's file for corporate environments, so that if they're not performing their jobs, they go back to that document and they performance manage from it. That's really what a job description does. It's meant to serve as a performance management or a tool to basically document what somebody's supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Right. But it's not helpful. Like really, like in practice, it's not, no one looks at that. And so what I think is super important is taking it and turning instead of doing a job description, you actually write out like specific things the role is going to be responsible for and needs to execute on within a timeline, right? Over the next year. Like, what is the purpose of this role being here? And what do they actually have to do in your business? And think about it that way. Instead of just Googling job description for project manager and using that, like, what does that mean in your business, and writing that out, and then identifying, okay, what expertise does this role need to have and this person need to have to execute on these things, a handful of those, and then the core values, right, that you've established for your company.
Yeah.
And that is useful because what that does then is it creates the basis for how you create the interview process and how you create interview questions to assess, what you're assessing for.
Right.
And then when that person starts, you give it to them and you're like, hey, this is what you need to do in the next year. This is the expertise we expect that you have. And this is how you need to operate when you're doing these things, right?
Yeah.
Like it makes it more useful. And so then that is like internal, like you're not going to post that anywhere, right?
Right.
So then what you do is you take that and you turn it into a job posting, which is basically a sales copy, like that is where you're selling why your business is so cool, who you are, why the role is so great, what do they get to work on, how are they going to make an impact on your business? And then you describe like our ideal person comes with this background, this experience, and you're writing it as a job ad to make people want to come work for you. And I think that's where people get it wrong, is like they just copy and paste an old school job description into Indeed, and they're wondering why they're not getting job applicants or the wrong ones. And it's because there's nothing exciting about it. Like the right people aren't being inspired to apply from whatever you wrote. And so really I look at those two things.
Yeah. I love how you're speaking about it. It's almost the same thing as business owners. When we're creating content, we're creating it to call in our ideal client. And so we're very mindful of like the verbiage and the energy and just the way that we're speaking. But then oftentimes we go to write this job posting to bring someone into the team, and it's like this cut and dry, bland, vanilla thing. And so what I had learned a couple of years ago was to include some personality in the job posting, which I remember looking at an example, and it said something, oh, what did it say? Something like, we're looking for a unicorn ninja or something. And I was like, what? But it was the perfect example for me to sort of give myself the permission to say things like, yeah, you know what? No job is above you and no job is beneath you. Because we were looking for someone who was willing to, quite literally, Lauren, who's the COO of our company, she's our integrator. She had started a couple of years ago as my executive assistant. And when we were living in New York City, there were days that she was returning stuff to Forever 21, or at the time was probably Forever 35 or something like that. So it was really important to me that this person wasn't going to have a chip on their shoulder or their nose in the air saying, oh, that's below me, right? It's like, no, we wanted someone that was going to grow into the job. And so by me infusing some of my personality and the company culture personality into the job posting, I found that like the best applicants were coming forward. And it was so much more exciting than just this boring cut and paste executive assistant role or whatever that would have been.
Exactly. And like, think about and I don't even know if you ever actually applied for a job, but like I have applied for a lot of jobs in my life, and like, there's nothing inspiring. Now there is, but a lot of times there's not. And it's like, I always think like, where would I want to apply? Like, what would inspire me to apply to this job? And I think it's so important to remember that your business, nobody's going to, just like you always say this, or maybe it's just to me, like nobody cares about your business as much as you do.
Yeah.
No, like if you're a small business owner, you might have 20,000 followers on Instagram. The majority of the job seekers don't know who you are. Like that doesn't matter. And so I think just remembering that, and when you're writing the job description or the job posting, excuse me, even I'm trying to change that language, like you need to make people excited about you, like brag about you, brag about your business. Like not everybody knows who you are. Even though in your circle of friends, they may,
Sure.
I think that's just an important thing to remember, when you're writing that.
Yeah. So last question before we shift gears. When you're writing a job posting, I don't know if this is a good thing, a bad thing, if it's neutral. I'd love your opinion on it. One of the things that I was told, which we did do, was sort of in this job posting. So posting comes first, then there's a bunch of questions next. Then those questions, depending on how the person answers it, would then yield a next step for us. Would it be like first round interview? Then we did second, third, whatever project, right? So in the initial questions that we asked after the job posting, we were prompted by some mentors to throw in a couple like quick decision questions, meaning a few of the questions that we had in there, if the person answered them, quite frankly, wrong, the applicant was immediately tossed out. And so what was really interesting was the questions that we put in there to help filter were not necessarily skill-based questions, but a lot of them were more personality type questions, or we put questions in about certain books or podcasts they might be reading or listening to. We put questions in, of course, like the standard, why do you want this job type of thing. And it was really interesting because, and I say this with love, I think we've maybe all made this mistake before, but we had a bunch of applicants this first time when we were hiring for my executive assistant position say, well, I just really want to learn from Jess. Like we even had a girl say, I've never been able to afford to join her program, so I want to learn from her and work for her. And in my head, I'm like, oh no, like I'm not going to bring you in and pay you to learn from me. You will learn from me for sure when you're in the business, but I think you're confused, right? Like the role is that you're coming in to support us and scale the company and scale the team. So what are your thoughts on sort of throwing a couple questions in that would essentially just sift people out?
I think it depends. The answer is it depends, which is an annoying answer. But one, it depends on the status of the job market. Last year doing that, I think it was very hard to find anybody to fill jobs that the more lengthy or the more, I don't want to say tricky your application process is, you're probably weeding out the people you actually need to be talking to. Right. And so I think it depends on what the labor market's like. I think it's getting better, obviously, in light of like companies laying off. So it is definitely becoming a more balanced market where there's still, I guess I don't know the exact numbers, but I believe there's still more jobs than there are people looking for jobs. So that that can play a factor into your application process, right? And I think the questions, it just depends on the role, quite candidly, like on if that's helpful or if it's not. I think it can be. And also people are applying to jobs quickly on the train, on the bus. Like the majority of people apply for jobs on their phones. And so they may mistype. I don't know. I have mixed feelings about it, to be completely honest. I don't necessarily add those. What I do is I like have a couple questions that they have to provide thoughtful answers to. Like I really love the question, like, tell us something that's unique about yourself that is on your resume. Like, I like that question. Why do you want to work for us? Or, obviously that's an easy one, but I do think the answers to those are more meaningful than a laundry list of like, select this or this, or yes or no. Like, I don't know that that's super helpful.
Yeah. Something that we did that I loved, which spoiler, if you're ever going to apply for one of our jobs, you'll probably run into one of these questions, but we did like a 2-part question. And then if the person didn't answer both questions in their response, it was very telling to us that they maybe missed the detail. And to your point, maybe they're on the phone, maybe they were rushing, but like, that's not really the point. The point was I asked you 2 things in one question, right?
100%.
So yeah, I think for us, it was super helpful to put that stuff in. Okay. So I know I said we were going to shift gears, but now I have one more question. What are your thoughts or opinions on, it's 2022. Do people put Instagram handles and TikToks and followers and stuff on on resumes nowadays? Is that normal?
It's funny. I actually was thinking about this yesterday because I'm hiring for a social media role for a client. And I'm like looking up LinkedIn profiles, and I'm sorry if this is throwing shade at people. I don't mean to, but they like put on LinkedIn that their job title is an Instagram influencer, right? So I'm like, oh, sweet. And they like haven't posted in like years, just bad. Anyway, so that makes me giggle. Oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing it. Here's the problem. Here's what's going on in my brain right now. I hate when people put their picture on their resume because it just like, for all of like bias, like it just is not a good practice for that in your initial screening of an applicant. Like, you want to like, actually there's a lot of companies, big like companies in tech, that remove names and photos. Like, they remove names and definitely if there's photos from all resumes before recruiters even look at them. Like, they don't even see the candidate's name because there's so much bias that goes into a lot of those things.
And a lot of it's subconscious, right?
Like a lot of it is unintentional. There's a lot, unfortunately, of intentional as well. But so when you have an Instagram, like, it's same thing. You find out that the person has kids, and like, you find out certain things that if you decide not to hire them and they say it's because of that reason, then you can get into trouble. I don't think it's something that you should be super worried about, but it is something to be considered, like, to think about.
Yeah.
Now, if your job is a social media role,
right,
or a marketing role, then probably, right?
Right.
I mean,
because it's like your portfolio at that point.
Yeah. And really, there's no difference between Instagram and LinkedIn. It's the same thing. Like, it's a social networking site. It's just like slightly different use cases, right? So I don't know. I would give listeners, if you're somebody who's looking for a job, just know that your potential future employer is looking at your social medias.
Yeah. Which they could be anyway, right? Like, I mean, it's so easy to Google.
100%.
Or to look it up.
So just like be mindful of that. Like,
Yeah. Okay. So let's shift gears. So I want to go back to what we were talking about before, where it's this sort of challenge with a lot of new entrepreneurs. I think any entrepreneur, business owners, coaches, where the giving up the control and the delegating is really difficult. So we definitely have listeners right now who are listening saying, I know I need to hire. I'm at capacity. I can't do this anymore. I'm wearing all the hats. Keep filling in the blanks, right? Like I can go on and on and on. They're super stressed out. And it's like, it works until it doesn't. And you get to a point where you're basically approaching burnout. But here's a big one. I don't have time to hire. I don't have time to train. I can't give it up, right? So how do you sort of coach these entrepreneurs? Like, so what are some tips you have for the person who's listening who's like, I know I need to, but.
Well, I'm a tough love kind of person. So
That's
I
why I
would
love
be
you.
like, great, you signed up for this. Like, it's a great problem. Like this, you signed up for this. This is a great problem to have. If you're going to scale your business and be a really successful entrepreneur, you got to learn how to hire a team. Like you just do. Like you just do. So that's what I would probably say initially. But I would look at like, what are the things that are the easiest for you to delegate? Like go through and think about like, what can I easily get off of my plate? And I think a lot of times it's something that can be completely outsourced to like a professional.
Does it even have to be something that's inside the business, or could it be delegating stuff off of your life plate?
Yeah. I mean, you could totally do that. Like hire a cleaner, hire someone to do the cooking for you, like all of those things, 100%. I guess I don't even think about that, but yes, like hire someone to do those things.
Yeah.
You could hire a personal assistant, but I don't know. I don't know that many people need personal assistants truly, but definitely hire someone to help with some of those things.
Yeah.
Then in your business, think about the things that can be like completely outsourced or that you can give to somebody else. And I like, even for me, for example, like I needed somebody to do my social media. Like I could do it. I enjoy it. I don't have, it's not getting done. I don't have time for it. And it's something that people do completely on their own. Right. So I outsourced that monthly. And, their team has a whole process for it. I'm completely delegated it to the point where I need to bring it in house, but I don't have to think about it. I just got to show up, review stuff, talk about stuff, and be done. So it's like, think about those things because those are going to be the easiest things to just hire an expert at. Like, I don't think the first person you add to your team, whether it's part-time or full-time, I don't necessarily think should be an assistant. Like hiring an assistant, you need to be able to assign tasks to. Like they oftentimes are very entry level and they don't actually have the skills that are going to maximize your time a lot of times. And so I think that they can end up causing more work than just paying a social media team, a podcasting team, or whoever to do some of the work. So
that was my next question. What would be some of your first hires? Like, what would you suggest for someone?
I mean, it totally depends on the business. I think if your business is one that's very service-based, I don't even know if that's like I'm thinking photographers, right? Like you could probably hire a photographer who can do some of the actual shoots for you, right? That might be a good use of your time. So if you're in a business that has those types of roles, having a second person part-time to do some of those things might be helpful. I think outsourcing is the right way to go first. And then it gets to the point where it's like, okay, now all those outsourced things can become a full job. I kind of look at it as like, first you need to hire like experts and outsource it. Then once your business grows, then you need to hire generalists who can maybe do a little, like all of the something. And then once you've really scaled to like 50 people, then you need to hire experts again. Right. So you'll go from like an email, like marketing support, I don't know, I can't even think of a social media person, email person, and then they become a CMO, a CMO at your company. And then that person's so slammed that you're like, okay, now we need a full-time email marketing person. Now we need a full-time social media. So it kind of like ebbs and flows. But I would say I think what people really need when they need an administrative assistant is a project manager.
Snaps to that all day.
Like,
yeah, especially because I find so many visionaries and creators, that's not their zone of genius. I'm capable, I can do it. I was a teacher for 8 years. I'm really good at writing curriculums. I'm super organized, and I don't really enjoy it. And it's not really where I want to spend my time. And so for me to have a project manager, that's someone that's going to take that 30,000 foot view of the project or the business as a whole, she's going to poke holes in it and also say to me like, hey, based on everything we're doing, that doesn't really fit in right now. I know you're excited about it, right? So I think that's huge. What would you tell someone who's like, yeah, but I'm not ready. I'm not ready to hire because I don't have the money. It's really scary. I don't know where to find the people. I don't know. I don't have the time to train them. Are there any sort of hacks or tips that you could give someone? Because I feel like we kind of have always hired before we were like truly ready.
Yeah.
Because we're hiring for where we're going, not where we're at.
Right. I mean, I think if it's a financial thing, work with your who's ever helping with your finances to determine, long-term planning, cash flow. I guess the finance thing, like for me, doesn't scare. Like it's like hire them. And if you don't have money in 6 months, then like, I'm not trying to be ruthless, but you're not married to them. Like,
but also wouldn't the intention for them coming in be that they're going to help grow the revenue?
Exactly. I guess. Yeah, exactly. So like, it's just not a fair for me. Advice would be if you don't feel ready, like maybe start part-time.
Yeah.
Right? Like hire somebody who does some of this work part-time for multiple people, dip your toes in, that would be what I would say, I guess. But you're going to just have to jump at some point. So I would say that. I mean, there's a lot of platforms and software that help with a lot of things. Like, are you maximizing those? Could you hire somebody as a contractor to set up better systems for you? Like, could you get like a Kajabi expert to help set up a bunch of stuff? Could you get an Asana expert to set up your systems? Like,
and then use Zapier to make them all talk.
Exactly. Exactly.
So in terms of platforms, there's also tons of platforms like Upwork and Fiverr where we can hire like one-off situations, one-off little job postings, affordable work outsourced in other countries. And it's very common for people to bring in a VA, which is a virtual assistant. And VAs could do essentially anything, whatever their skill set might be. What are your personal thoughts? Because I have thoughts around it, but what are your personal thoughts about outsourcing overseas, outsourcing to lots of different VAs versus having someone kind of like in-house, even if it's part-time in-house?
I mean, either way, if you're going to have a VA, you need to be able to clearly articulate what you want them to do.
Yeah.
You need to have like a task management process, right? And so like a lot of time, especially if they are overseas, like you're probably going to have to do Loom recordings of what you need to have done and how to do it. So you have to be very organized, I think, in order to have a VA relationship work very well. I know a lot of people who do it and it's really successful, but they're also assigning tasks,
right?
Not like help me run my business.
Right.
And so I think that can be very helpful. I think they can, very helpful with email. If you need someone to help respond to email, if respond to your email, set up calendars, other like even content stuff, I think on Canva, things like that can be really helpful. So I think regardless, you have to be able to assign tasks, whether that's here or anywhere or, overseas. I think if a lot of the work needs to be in a certain brand voice, I think it can be lots of things get lost in translation a little bit. Overseas. It's not everything, so I don't want to like say that, but I hired a recruiting, basically a sourcer in Brazil to help me find candidates for jobs that I was working on. And I had to take a lot of time to teach her about what industries were like in the US. I had to create company lists. I had to explain the differences and the nuances of job titles to her. And she did a phenomenal job, but I knew that I was signing up to teach her about the US labor market a little bit, but she was amazing. And her and I still have a relationship. So I think you just have to be aware of that.
Yeah.
I feel like I went on a really long tangent, but
no, it's important because I see so many coaches wanting to just hire a ton of VAs, and it's not good or bad. It's always just neutral. But what comes with that are things like you're saying, there might be communication, or there might be some extra schooling and experience that needs to be taught, but also there's a boundary. And we can talk about this as we kind of move into the difference between a contractor and an employee, but there's a boundary, right? And a lot of times I have friends who use VAs, and one VA might be working with like 9 different businesses, and they're truly assigned to do this task, right? Make you a logo, and that's it. And so when they're not an employee, or when they're not in-house, the back and forth, or the help on other projects, or the help with the bigger mission of actually like growing and scaling the company, it's just not there. They're really hired to do this one specific thing. So I think that I personally believe there's a time and a place for something like a task-oriented VA. And then for us, when it comes to like our executive leadership team, that's more of like an all-in situation, right? You've got your hands in everything. And so I'd love if we could just talk a little bit about the difference between a contractor and an employee. So what does that look like? What are some of the misconceptions of having a full-time employee? What are some of the pros and cons of full-time versus contractor?
Well, the first thing I'm going to talk about is something. I'm going to correct you on something.
Yes, please.
Being full-time has no bearing on employee versus contractor. You can have part-time employees. And so I think that is actually the biggest misconception, is like people think that, oh, I want this person to work 40 hours a week, so they're going to be an employee. And like that actually plays no weight. Well, it does a little bit, but so you can have part-time W-2 employees. And so you'll hear people use the word W-2 and 1099, and it really just has to do with the way people are paid and tax implications. So when you hire an independent contractor, you are paying them, they're invoicing you, and you're paying the invoice, just like you would a software, right?
Yep.
And that person, oh, my Minnesota accent just came out right there. That person,
it's just in the Midwest for like a month.
Oh, it's coming back.
Happens.
That person is responsible for paying their own taxes, right? And you don't have to pay any taxes for that person's work. When you hire an employee, and independent contractor and freelancer are the same thing.
Sure.
Like freelance, it's just a different word.
And with that, there's no benefits, 401k, vacation, none of that.
Correct. Yep. Correct. Usually you can, but most of the time you don't get that.
Yeah.
And then a W-2 employee can be full-time or part-time. They can be paid hourly. They can be paid a salaried. Those things don't really they do determine. It can be all of those things to be qualified a W-2 employee.
Sure.
And that basically just means that you as an employer are paying them as an employee. You have to pay payroll taxes on them. You have to collect payroll taxes from their paychecks and remit to the states. There's tax implications.
Right.
And it's usually about like Shannon and I were just talking about this. It's like 7.8% or something is like what you pay as an employee in payroll taxes. And so that's the actual difference from a payroll perspective. As an employee, there's also a lot more protected laws protecting an employee's relationship with an employer. So you have to make sure you know what those are, because those pop up as well. And I would say the biggest difference, the thing for listeners, there's so many, we could do a whole podcast episode on this, but what's important for listeners, I think, to your show to know is that to hire somebody as a contractor or freelancer, they need to have free reign to pick when they work,
Yep.
how they get their projects done. You basically just assign them a deliverable and they complete it. Like that's it. If you dictate that they have to be on their computer from 8 a.m. until 10 a.m. Monday through Friday, they're probably a part-time employee, not a contractor. So it's like, how much judgment do you have over how and where they work, right? If you require them to go somewhere at certain hours, it's probably an employee. So those are the things, that's like how to think about it. And then if you've decided that somebody is a W-2 employee, then there's a lot of next things you need to think about. Which happy to talk about. I just will stop and see if you have questions from that.
No, it's so good. And I'm glad you corrected me too. It's interesting. I think there's such a fear for people stepping into even hiring a contractor or hiring an employee. And there's so much, oh my gosh, there's so many unknowns. And it's just one of those things where you really just start to learn as you do it and you go through it. And, you know, we've learned so much over the years hiring both contractors as well as employees, and figuring out different benefits that as a small business owner, right? We have benefits as a small business owner and for them as well. And having the conversation openly and candidly, which we could have a whole episode on conversations, but having these conversations with your prospect and asking, you know, what are they looking for and what are they excited about and what do they expect out of the job is really, really important. And I also know that there are slight changes state to state as well that you do need to be mindful of, especially in the digital world where a lot of us work virtually and we hire people that are actually living in different states or different countries. And so just making sure that you always do your due diligence, whether that's with someone like yourself who's a professional at hiring or an accountant or a lawyer or really all of the above, just to make sure that all your, you know, I's are dotted and T's are crossed, right?
Right. Because wherever the employee lives is where the laws you have to follow.
Sure.
And so I just think that's a quick note that a lot of people don't realize. They're like, well, I'm a company in Arizona and I hired somebody in Illinois. Like they have to follow Arizona laws. And no, that's not true. They actually follow Illinois laws. Is something that definitely is new and comes with a whole bunch of things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always a learning process. Oh man, I could talk to you all day. There's so many. I still have like a list of questions we didn't even get to. So maybe we'll have you back on the show. But before we wrap it up, I just want to ask a couple rapid fire questions. You ready?
Ready.
So I need to know, because you're another RV gal, where is your favorite place to park? I know this. Goodness. I feel like I know this answer.
I'm gonna I don't know. Probably Sedona. I love Colorado, but I just want a cabin there. I don't want my RV there. So I'm going to say Sedona. There's a road called Schnellby Road if you're going up the 17 towards Munns Park that you can get off on. And it's a fire road and you can drive all the way into Sedona. It ends up being a Jeep road.
Yeah.
And at the end of it, well, now we have a rooftop tent on our Jeep. So now we're going to go camp here. We couldn't have got the camper there, but off that road is great because then you can like go into the backside of Sedona.
Ah, I love it. What are you currently reading or listening to?
Just started a new book called Sacred Hoops by Phil Jackson. It's all about his some of his coaching philosophies. I'm 2 chapters in and it's very good so far.
Cool. I love it. Best piece of advice you've been given?
Just start.
Yeah, I know, right?
Like just start, or like and also action is a cure for anxiety. Like do something, right? I think those have been the 2 best pieces of advice.
Action is the cure for anxiety. I love that. I'm going to borrow that one. I'm not going to, hypothetically, if I were to hand you a $50,000 check tomorrow, what would be the first place that you would invest it in the business or for people principles? Where would you put it? And you could divide it up if you wanted.
Where would I put it? I would probably... invest in a mastermind, to be honest.
Ooh. Oh, I just got chills. That's so exciting.
I just need to be in the rooms with other people because it helps me realize how valuable my knowledge is and also how much I can help people. So I think it would be investing in something like that.
Oh, I love that. Maybe we'll be in the same one in 2023.
I hope so.
All right. Before I ask you our final question, where can people find you? Where can they learn to work with you? What do you have going on that's exciting and new?
Yeah. So I currently have a podcast called Hiring School. And listeners can actually follow, if they go to hiringschool.com, I just launched a new site, and there I have 2 freebies that they can download.
Cool.
One is like tips on how to become better at interviewing, and other is like interview questions and question guide to help just kind of like plug and play. So those are on that site, along with the podcast. And then I also have a course called Hiring School, where I break down everything you need to know about hiring into a course. And it actually like sets up your hiring machine, your hiring operations as well. So you can see all of that stuff there at it's hiringschool.com.
I love it. We'll drop all that into the show notes. And then, of course, on Instagram at People Principles, and the Tiki-Taki as well.
Yep.
The Tiki-Taki, which you went viral on like your second post ever.
I know. I need to, I'm excited to keep doing more of them.
I love it. Awesome. Well, before we sign off, I end every episode with this one final question. So we believe at Digital Business Evolution that our businesses are a reflection of us, and they will only grow to the extent that we grow. And we believe that we are always evolving and growing. So I'd love to ask you, what is your next personal or business evolution?
Working on my money mindset. And I don't know what that necessarily means, because I'm in it, listening to lots of things and working through that as a business owner. It's been interesting. And I'm realizing that that's something that I need to work on personally that will inevitably also affect my business, to take me out of some fear that comes up when you launch things or make decisions and stuff like that.
Oh, I love that. You get to work on it. Thank you so much for being vulnerable with that answer and letting us have a peek inside. Jackie, it's such a blast. I adore you. I'm so grateful for you. Listeners, if you are ever interested in anything having to do with hiring, even if you're not there and you're not ready, but you just want to learn about it and learn more about what it would look like for yourself, definitely go check Jackie out. I can't speak highly enough about Jackie. She is incredible. If you loved this episode, make sure you take a screenshot, share it out on social media, tag Jackie and I both at People Principles and at I Am Jessica DeRose. Tell us what you loved. And as always, cheers to your evolution. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you loved this episode, I invite you to be a part of our ripple effect and share it with a friend. And please, if you feel called, take 30 seconds to leave a 5-star review, and I'll be forever grateful. Until next time, cheers to your evolution.